Welcome back to Roots Music History. On this podcast, we talk about the stories behind songs and legends, as well as moments in history and history in the making. On September 11th, 2025, Bert Berns was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. You may not immediately recognize his name, but you absolutely know his songs. Bert Berns was the man behind era-defining hits like Twist and Shout, Piece of My Heart, Brown-Eyed Girl, and Under the Boardwalk. He was a producer, songwriter, and singer. His fingerprints are all over the sound of 1960s rock, soul, and R&B. Yet despite his influence, his story has often been buried. His son, Bert Berns, says that's because his dad, Bert, was quite political and outspoken. He also says he had mob connections, or allegedly had mob connections, and was an open Zionist. His son, Brett, also says that through his dad's outspoken political views and unwavering support for Israel, he ended up creating some enemies in the business who worked very hard and succeeded in a lot of ways to bury his legacy and his story. That is until now. So let's rewind the clock and dig up the roots that grew the remarkable legacy of Bert Berns. Bert Berns' story begins in the Bronx, New York, where he was born November 8, 1929, to Russian Jewish immigrant parents. His father, Charles Berns, was a hard-working tradesman who worked in various trades to support his family, and his mother, Esther, was a homemaker who kept the household running. The family was really well known in their community, primarily because they also owned a really nice dress shop. They lived right above the shop and dedicated most of their days to the dress shop's operations. This allowed the family to live comfortably during this time, but they also really valued frugality, especially as they tried to keep things going during the Depression era. Bert had two older sisters who didn't know it yet when Bert was born, but both sisters would really have to step up and help their mother when Bert was about 9 or 10 years old, because that's when Bert contracted rheumatic fever, a condition that ended up leaving him with a weakened heart and the looming knowledge that his life might be shorter than most. In fact, doctors told his parents that Bert probably wouldn't live past 21 years old. And this sense of urgency would later infuse Bert's career, driving him to create at a feverish pace once he entered the music industry. Growing up in this modest working-class Yiddish neighborhood in New York, Bert was exposed to a variety of music. Latin rhythms that were pulsing out of Harlem, R&B that was echoing from jukeboxes, and the emerging voices of rock and roll on the radio. After his heart condition diagnosis, it was important that Bert slow down. Running and being chaotic outside with his fellow classmates wasn't an option for Bert. His parents knew he needed an outlet and a hobby, but one that wouldn't cause physical stress on him. So they decided to gift him a piano and encouraged him to use music as an outlet. Bert immediately took to music and fell in love with it. He started taking piano lessons and soaking in jazz records, and he even started developing a really deep appreciation for Afro-Cuban music. Unlike many of his contemporaries who entered the music industry through formal channels, Berns remained somewhat of an outsider. He was really just a neighborhood kid with a sharp ear and an unstoppable ambition. After finishing school, Berns drifted through odd jobs and briefly studied at New York University. He spent time in Havana in the 1950s, where Cuban rhythms made a lasting impression on his writing style. His heart condition kept him from being drafted in World War II, but his heart condition also served as a constant reminder to him that he had no time to waste, professionally or personally. Bert was beating the odds, though. Not only did he live to be 30, that's when he started breaking into the music industry. At 31 years old, to be exact, he took a job as a staff songwriter at Robert Mellon Music, a music publishing company in New York. And this was the first time he was being paid to write. His first taste of success came in 1961 when he was 32 years old. This was when he co-wrote A Little Bit of Soap for the Jarmels, an R&B group out of Richmond, Virginia. The song's success proved he could write hits, but it was just the beginning of what would become an explosive career. Later in 1961, his life changed forever, even though he wouldn't know it yet, because that's when he wrote the song Twist and Shout. He wrote it under his alias name, Bert Russell. It was first recorded by an American R&B group called the Top Notes. It was actually produced by Phil Spector. If you haven't seen my series on Phil Spector on this channel, I will link it in the upper right-hand corner and in the description box down below. Highly recommend. But the song didn't really gain popularity until the Isley Brothers recorded it in 1962. When the Isley Brothers recorded it, they added a new bridge and a different tempo, and the song immediately became a huge hit. Twist and Shout became the group's first single to reach the top 20 on the US Billboard Hot 100 singles chart. That was a mouthful. This specific version was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 2010, by the way. The song was so popular that in 1962, the Beatles picked it up. The Beatles' rendition of Twist and Shout was released on their UK album Please Please Me in 1963. And this little song caught the attention of Jerry Wexler, a powerhouse producer and executive at Atlantic Records. Wexler decided to bring Bert into Atlantic Records in 1963. And this would be the beginning of a professional partnership that would last for years to come. The version skyrocketed to number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 by April of 1964. And since then, Twist and Shout has remained a cross-generational classic, tied to many different eras. Bert followed this success with Cry to Me, recorded by Solomon Burke, and Tell Him, a hit for the Exciters. These songs revealed his signature style, a gospel-inspired melody fused with R&B grit, and a little bit of those Latin rhythms that were coming out of Harlem during his childhood. And this combination instantly became a danceable, identifiable sort of identity for Bert Berns. By 1964, Bert Berns was no longer just a hopeful songwriter trying to break into the business. He had become a proven hitmaker. And not just a proven hitmaker, but also a proven producer and label executive. In 1964, Berns turned his attention to writing with a more romantic touch. One of his greatest successes that year was Baby I'm Yours, recorded by Barbara Lewis. The song was a tender, soul pop ballad that showcased Berns' ability to craft melodies that were intimate and universal. It climbed into the Billboard Top 20 and has since become a standard covered by everyone from Petula Clark all the way to Cher. At the time, Berns was broadening his influence in the UK. He wrote Here Comes the Night, which was first recorded by Lulu. Though Lulu's version saw only modest success, the song would find its true voice a year later in the hands of Van Morrison and Them. Bert became responsible for Van Morrison's earliest Decca recordings. It was also in 1964 Bert met his wife, Eileen Stewart. They met in New York City while Eileen was working in the music entertainment scene, and while Bert was at the peak of his success as a songwriter and producer. The two married the same year they met and together would have 3 children, Brett Berns, Russ Berns, and Cassie Berns, all born roughly between 1965 and 1967. Bert then founded Bang Records in 1965 with partners from Atlantic Records, including Ahmed Ertgun, Nushi Ertgun, and Jerry Wexler, the first letters of their names all being an acronym for Bang. At Bang, Bert saw a string of hits from 1965 to 1966, or as the kids these days in Nashville call them, bangers. These bangers included I Want Candy by the Strangeloves, Hang On Sloopy by the McCoys, and also Piece of My Heart by Irma Franklin, recorded in 1966, later made more famous by Janis Joplin in her 1968 cover of the song. Cry to Me by Betty Harris, also in this era. And this is also the era when he first started making connections with Neil Diamond. Bert also established the R&B and soul music label Shout Records after he had already established Bang. In 1967, Van Morrison and Bert reconnected for one of Bert's last famous hits, Brown Eyed Girl. Bert lived far past what doctors had predicted. They originally said they didn't think he'd make it past 21, and here in 1967, Bert is 38 years old. In the documentary Bang, The Bert Berns Story, which was put out by his son, Bert Berns, they poetically make the pun that with every hit song Bert produced, it quite literally took a little piece of his heart. Obviously, a pun to the song, Piece of My Heart. If you didn't get that. Bert Berns' time on Earth eventually ran out on December 30th, 1967, when he succumbed to his heart condition he had developed from that rheumatic fever. His wife Eileen was only 24 at the time she was widowed, but decided to step up and take over management of Bang Records. Eileen became one of the youngest women to run a record label, and she would oversee Neil Diamond's earliest hits. She'd continue to manage the Bang Records catalog for decades, making her one of the most famous and youngest, most successful women in music history. And then finally, on September 11th, 2025, Bert Berns was officially inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. The ceremony was held at New York City's 54 Below Cabaret Club and was hosted by former longtime David Letterman sidekick, Paul Schaefer. Berns' son Brett and daughter Cassandra were also there, and tributes included video messages from other Songwriter Hall of Famers, including Paul McCartney and Van Morrison himself. Guests included Songwriter Hall of Fame inductees Steve Miller, and Steven Van Zandt was also there. His daughter Cassandra Berns gave a performance along with singers Betty Harris and Mary Bridget Davis, known from A Night with Janis Joplin. There were also a few other notable attendees, a few stars from the 2014 off-Broadway musical Piece of My Heart, The Bert Berns Story. Their names were Brian Fencart, Linda Hart, and Teresa Gaddison. It was a night of celebration and honor for a man who changed the course of music history in such a short period of time. Not only is Bert Berns' story inspirational, but it is everlasting and unfortunate that it isn't talked about more. If you like this type of content, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up button. You also have the option to give the channel a super thanks. A super thanks is a button at the bottom of the play bar that allows you to donate any amount of money that you would like to the channel and to this episode. And of course, I will see you on the next Roots Rockumentary.
Hungry for the road all my life, thirsty for adventure all my youth, chasing all my